Hello, welcome back to the Wizard Den. I'm going to be speaking on ego. This is going to be separated into two parts. The first part is going to be clarifying some details and setting down my point of view. And the second part is going to be giving examples. Okay, so for part one, let's begin with that. All ego is not bad ego. There's a common misconception floating about that all ego is bad. And just to break that down in a matter of seconds, if you pay attention to spirits, they all have an ego. They're all driven by their ego, their sense of identity. Belial has an ego. Lucifer has an ego. Raziel has an ego. Hanael has an ego. Mammon has an ego. Mamun has an ego. Alabyad has an ego. Thoth has an ego. All the spirits have an ego. Okay? There is a good ego and a bad ego. I separate them by calling one the physical ego, which is the bad ego. Identifying with things of the physical realm, okay? And then you have the spiritual ego, which is more so you on a soul level. The physical ego is destructive, and the spiritual ego is constructive and productive. Okay, and that's the best way to separate the two. Your physical ego will sit there and it will get offended when somebody, says something, and it will, get upset, and it'll start acting out of pocket and controlling you. The physical ego has a way of controlling you, not you controlling it. The spiritual ego is you in control. For example, my identity, who I am, who I want to be, is spiritual ego. That is who I am, who I identify as. I am a good person. I will stand up for that. The old saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, applies to spiritual ego. You have to stand for something. And you can, defend that. But you would not make a fool out of yourself and be on autopilot as if you were in the physical ego. Whereas, the physical ego will have you doing things like working out just so you don't feel insecure. The physical ego acts off of insecurities and trauma, whereas the spiritual ego does not. The spiritual ego is in full control, and it's all about identity. Who are you? What are you doing this for? Who are you? And, what are your motives? Such and such. Identity is vital. If you plan on evolving, growing, you'll never grow if you don't have an ego, because you won't feel the need to gain more power, to gain more notoriety, to gain strength, to gain wisdom. All these things are promoted by spiritual ego, which is a positive thing. So, but there's this misconception going around that all ego is bad. And people are afraid to own up to the fact that they have an ego. People are afraid to say, so what? I have an ego, so do you. Everybody has an ego. Instead, they'll sit there and lie and go back and forth. I don't have an ego. You have an ego. And then they, align that with, well, if you have an ego, you must not have any power at all. And if you have an ego, that means that you're not strong magically speaking, which is bullshit. Ego on a spiritual level is not an identifier of growth. It's not at all. your level of power. Not at all. Not at fucking all. Ego on the physical level, though. A physical ego is an identifier of your growth. If you start acting out and being insecure, it does kind of show, where you are in your growth. But also, I would like to say that doesn't always point directly to you being weak. It is possible for someone to digress or regress, whatever the word is. Somebody could, be strong as hell, go through a lot of growth, gain a lot of power, do a lot of these initiations, and then digress into ego once again. You still have all this power, but then you start gaining all your insecurities, becoming insecure yourself, and digressing, and it's completely possible. So that is not a, for sure identifier of where a person is in growth. It's just not. Nothing is a for sure identifier of where somebody is in growth. Nothing. Not trauma, not, what they have to heal with. Nothing. Nothing is going to automatically give away. All it shows is what somebody is currently going through, what their current issues and problems are that they're dealing with. But you see it a lot where people will automatically assume just because somebody is dealing with something currently, that means they're a weak person or they haven't evolved at all. Now, I will say this. If somebody has had the same problem, say they had this physical ego for the last 8 months, okay? And they keep acting out and keep having to be, like, for example, the center of attention. And if they're not the center of attention, they get upset. And they act like that all the time for the whole 8 months you've known them. And that's a clear sign of a weak person that is faking their growth, okay? Because that is not a momentary lapse of judgment. That is a conclusive and long-term show of growth and where exactly they are. That is who they are, rather than a lapse of who they are to a moment of, I don't know what to say, digression. But that's all I'm gonna say from for this video. I'm gonna leave it there. The next video, part 2 segment of this, is gonna be examples between the two, so you can identify what spiritual ego is, and what physical ego is, and what's good ego and what's bad ego. So you can dive into that and start to accept who you are. Accept that you have an ego and that certain ego is good, and accept that and grow on it instead of neglecting yourself and parts of yourself just because other people do, and doing stuff because of fear of other people and their thoughts and opinions is weakness in and of itself. But we'll get into that in the next video, because that's physical ego in and of itself. But, okay, that's all. Y'all have a good one. That was part 1 of ego, physical versus spiritual.